Welcome to the fourth part of the wolf tutorial. This time, we will cover the texture painting of the model. Texture painting is not much different from painting a physical object. The process is similar to 3D sculpting. We will be painting the mesh in real time. Just as we did in 3D sculpting, it is advisable to use a graphics tablet when we are painting a texture, as we will have more dexterity. However, the same results can be achieved using a mouse, so it's really up to you. Since the last tutorial, I have upgraded Blender to 4.3, so you might want to do it too. Again, it is not strictly necessary to do so, but it will probably make it easier to follow this tutorial. We will start by painting the wolf's body, so let's select it. Before we start painting the wolf, we have to create a new material for the wolf's body. We will start by splitting the viewport into two different areas. To do this, move the mouse cursor to the bottom left corner of the viewport. The cursor will change its appearance. Press and hold the left mouse button and drag it to the right. We want to change the left area. Currently it is set to 3D viewport, but we want to change it to shader editor. If you did the unwrapping tutorial, you are familiar with the shader editor. In short, we will use the shader editor to edit the materials. For now, we won't be doing much editing, because we'll be more focused on texture painting, but again, we need to create the materials for that. We don't need the panel on the right in the shader editor, so press N to hide it. Now make sure you are in object mode and have the wolf's body selected. Then go to the properties panel on the right and select the material icon if it is not already selected. Create a new material and name it wolf body, or any other self-explanatory name so that it will be easier to identify later. Press Enter. In the shader editor, there are now two nodes that appeared as soon as we created the material. If by any chance you can't see the nodes, it may be because the shader editor is not set to object. If that is the case, change it to object. Like I explained in the unwrapping tutorial, nodes are essentially blocks of data that contain information about materials. The nodes are connected to each other via inputs and outputs and work from left to right, meaning that the first node on the left will contain the first piece of information, then the second node will add some more information, and the third node some more, and so on. Until we reach the final node, which should be the material output, that is, the final result of our material. We will start by creating the diffuse map. The diffuse texture is pretty much the most common type of texture. It's basically the raw color and pattern of a material, without any reflections, roughness, glossiness, etc. Here is a simple example of a material with diffuse specular roughness and normal maps. If we remove the normal, roughness, and specular from the material, we are left with just the diffuse map, which again, is simply the result of the raw colors and patterns of a given texture. The diffuse map is exactly what we will create in this video. With that in mind, go to the shader editor area. We want to create a node for the diffuse map. To do this, press Shift-A. Select Texture, and then Image Texture. Now we can drag the node wherever we want, and then press the left mouse button to place it. We can always grab the nodes whenever we want to, by pressing G. An image texture node is used to apply an image as a texture. We can even load an external file like a JPEG or PNG, which is what we will do later. The principal BSDF is a default node that combines multiple layers into a single easy-to-use node, meaning most of our maps will be linked to this node. We will connect the color output of the image texture node to the base color input of the principal BSDF node. To do that, press and hold over the color output and drag it to the base color input. This will allow us to see the texture on our model in the 3D viewport, because the texture is linked to the BSDF principal node, which in turn is linked to the material output. However, we will not be able to see the texture in the 3D viewport while in object mode. So let's change it to texture paint. Now we can see that the wolf has turned pink. The reason for this is that we haven't created a new image texture yet, so let's go ahead and do that. In the image texture node, press New. Let's name it something like Wolf Body Diffuse. As for dimensions, we want to make sure we create a texture that is large enough, otherwise we won't be able to have nice details and the texture will be pixelated. We also have to keep in mind that this will be the size of the texture image file. Since we are creating a texture for the wolf's body, we can go as far as 8192 by 8192 pixels. When talking about textures, the dimensions must always be the same for height and width. As for the color, we could leave it black, but let's go ahead and change it to some kind of beige, since wolves have beige in their color, and then go from there. Press New Image to create the texture. Now we can see that the color of the wolf in the 3D viewport has changed. We don't need the shader editor for now, so we will close it. To do this, move the mouse over the bottom left corner of the viewport, right in the middle of the viewport and shader editor areas. Press and hold the left mouse button and drag it a little to the left and up, then release the mouse button and the viewport will take up the entire screen again. We're almost ready to start painting our wolf, but there are a few things we need to do first. Before we start texture painting, and even before we start sculpting, we should prepare some references to help us. The best way to use reference images is through a reference image viewer, that is, an application that allows us to view and organize reference images while simultaneously using other software, such as Blender. A good example of a free reference image viewer is Bref. Bref allows us to arrange the reference images, drag them around, rotate them, resize them, zoom in and out. And we can even save the file and open it later, with the images exactly where we left them. So go to bref.org to download the application. Feel free to use any other image reference viewer if you prefer. Make sure you download the .exe file. Bref does not need to be installed, just double-click on the file to open it. Now we can place the Bref window over the Blender window. However, when we start working in Blender, the Bref window will disappear behind it, so the first thing we need to do is right-click somewhere inside Bref and select View. Always on top. This will allow us to work in Blender and still have the Bref window on top, so we can access it when we need it. To start adding images to Bref, simply go to the folder where the images are located and then drag and drop them into Bref. Feel free to resize and arrange the images in Bref as you wish. Don't forget that you can also rotate the images. If you press Shift while rotating them, they will rotate 15 degrees at a time. Let's continue arranging the images according to our needs. For now, we can place the head images on the right and the full body images on the left. Also, feel free to expand or move the Bref window if needed. That looks good enough for now, so let's hide the folder. Now is a good time to save our Bref file with the images as is. To do this, right-click somewhere inside Bref, select File, Save As, and then name it whatever you want. Just make sure it will be easy to identify later. Before we start painting the wolf, we will reduce the multi-resolution viewport levels, so we don't use too much RAM, otherwise Blender may become slower and this will interfere with the painting process. Let's expand the Properties panel a little bit to the left, so we can access the brush tools and still have the Reference window on the right. We will start by painting the white part of the wolf's fur. To begin with, we will pick the color we want from one of the reference images. To do this, we will right-click somewhere inside Bref. Select Images, Sample Color, and move the mouse over the images until we find the color we want. Left-click and the hex color code will be copied to the clipboard. Now the brush that is usually selected by default is the Paint Hard brush, and we want to change it to the Paint Soft brush. We will paste the hex color code we just copied from the image to use it in Blender. To do this, select the left color slot and press Ctrl V to paste the code. If the color seems too light or dark, feel free to drag the slider up or down to adjust it. It's finally time to start painting our wolf. If you are using a graphics tablet, you may want to leave the strength pressure enabled. This is because the strength of the brush will be affected by the pressure you apply to the pen. More pressure means more strength. If you are using a mouse, the strength pressure won't affect the brush at all, because you are pressing the mouse button to paint. If this is the case, you should keep changing the strength value according to your needs. Just like we did with the sculpting, we will paint the texture with the symmetry in the x-axis turned on. With the x-axis symmetry enabled, we only need to paint half of the mesh, as the other half will remain symmetrical. So let's start gently painting over the places where the wolf's fur is white. Just like we did when sculpting, we can also hold Shift while painting to smooth out the texture. Feel free to zoom in on the reference images to better see the colors and patterns. Change the brush radius when needed. The fur on the paws should also be white. Now if we open the UV editor and select the diffuse texture in the top menu, we will see the texture we've painted so far and how it behaves with the UVs. We may need to zoom out, since the texture is large. One important thing we need to understand is that when we are painting a texture, we have to save the texture itself, otherwise when we close Blender, everything we have done will be lost. So let's go ahead and save the diffuse texture. Select Image in the top menu, and then Save As. Choose the folder where you want to save the file and give it a name that will be easy to identify later. If you change the name or location of the texture, Blender will no longer be able to find it until you either change the name and folder back to the previous ones or change the path in Blender. Open the 3D viewport once again and let's continue painting the wolf. Again, let's use a reference image to get another color. Let's try a light brown this time. Paste it in Blender, and continue painting. Just like we did in the sculpting tutorial, make sure that Orbit Around selection is enabled, so that the viewport is always centered on the part of the mesh we are working on. Now let's use a darker brown. Add some details to the neck. Press and hold Shift whenever you need to smooth the texture. If you're having trouble zooming and moving the viewport, it may be because it's not centered where you need it. Simply press Tab to enter edit mode, select a face near the position you want to paint, and press Dot or Delete on the numpad to center the viewport, then go back to texture paint mode. It's starting to take shape. Don't forget to save the texture from time to time so you don't lose the progress you've made, and remember not to close Blender before doing so. Now we're going to use a dark gray. The upper part of the wolf's back is generally darker, and we will reproduce it. We will also darken the tail as we see in the reference image. Feel free to simulate any patterns you see in the images. For example, we can simulate that dark line in the hair. Continue smoothing the texture as needed. Some more patterns on the neck. Let's create some cool patterns on the head. Now let's use a lighter gray. An even lighter gray now. We can always swap colors and use the secondary color instead. Let's pick another color from the reference images. This time we want to pick a color from the ears. Naturally, we will use the color to paint the ears on the mesh. Keep changing colors as needed. Feel free to add more details to the texture. Let's use some more shades of gray on the wolf's back. We can use some kind of cream color for the lower part of the wolf's body. We'll use another reference image to help us add more details to the head. Keep changing the reference images and choosing different colors whenever needed. If we open the UV editor again, we can see all the changes we have made so far to the texture. Again, don't forget to save the texture occasionally so you don't lose your progress. Now let's paint the wolf's eyelids. Let's take a look at this reference image. Feel free to zoom in on the eye to see better. The eyelids of canids are usually dark, almost black sometimes. Let's go ahead and start painting. To see the details in the eyelids, we need to increase the subdivision levels in the multi-resolution modifier. If you feel Blender is getting slower, feel free to decrease 1 or 2 levels. Now, since we are painting the black parts of the wolf, we can move on to the nose. If there are any unpainted spots left behind, feel free to lower the subdivision levels in the multi-resolution modifier, and then paint again. This may solve the problem. The next step is the lips and gums. Again, if there are any unpainted spots left behind, lower the subdivision levels and paint again. we're going to add more details to the eyelids. So enter Object Mode, select the eyes and press H to hide them. This will allow us to work the eyelids better. Go back to Texture Paint mode. We will paint the eye socket. The eyes will cover it, but we will paint it nonetheless. Now to add more detail to the eyelids, we will use a gray color, so that instead of being all black, the eyelids have some lighter parts. Now we can unhide everything again. Go to Object Mode and press Alt-H to unhide everything. Select the wolf body and go back to Texture Paint mode. Let's do the same with the nose. Add some shades of gray to bring out the details. Now it's time to paint the mouth. It is difficult to paint the mouth with the entire body visible, as the mouth is partially hidden by the head and neck. Fortunately, since we unwrap the mesh, we can easily hide some islands and leave others visible. So press Tab to enter Edit mode. Press Hey twice to make sure nothing is selected. Move the mouse over the inside of the mouth and press L to select the island. Press Ctrl I to invert the selection, and then press H to hide it. Go to Object Mode and select and hide everything except the wolf's body. Now we can go back to Texture Painting mode and start painting, since there is nothing else visible besides the mouth and throat. We'll start by painting everything black and then add different colors. To help us paint the mouth, there's something we can do. In the menu on the right, open the Options tab and disable Back Face Culling. This will basically allow us to paint the back of the faces as well, meaning it will be easier and faster this way. For the record, there is a faster way, which is the Brush Fill tool. Because all you need to do is click on the object, and it will be filled with the selected color. I didn't do this to explain what back face culling does, but feel free to do it yourself. Enable the back face culling once again. Let's add some more reference images to be ref. We'll add this one to help us paint the mouth. This one, which can also help us with the mouth and tongue. To help us with the paws, we will add 2 images. Remember that you don't have to use the exact same images as me. As long as the images you use can help you in the texture painting process, you'll be fine. Let's continue painting the mouth, so double-click on the reference image you have with the wolf's mouth open to expand it. Again, don't forget to keep saving the image texture. We will start by painting the bottom part of the mouth, and for that reason, we will hide the upper part. Start rotating the viewport and press Alt until it locks in either the right or left orthographic view. Press Tab to enter Edit mode. Then press C and select Wireframe mode. Now we want to select just the top part of the mouth, so as we did in previous tutorials, we can press B to draw a rectangular selection to select the top faces. Keep repeating the process until the upper part of the mouth is completely selected. Switch back to Solid mode and then Texture Paint mode. We need to pick a color from the wolf's mouth. Paste it in Blender. Feel free to change it a little bit if you're not satisfied. Let's try to recreate what we see in the image. Don't forget to use the Shift key to smooth the texture when needed. Let's keep going with a lighter color. Keep changing colors as needed. Now let's repeat exactly the same process for the upper part of the mouth. In short, enter edit mode. Unhide everything by pressing Alt-H. Place the mouse over the mouth and then press L to select it. Press Ctrl-I to invert the selection, and then press H to hide it. Go to the orthographic right or left view by rotating the viewport, while pressing and holding Alt. Alternatively, you can press 3 on the numpad for the right view, or Ctrl and numpad 3 for the left view. Press C and select wireframe mode. Press B to draw a rectangle selection and then select the bottom faces. Hide the selection by pressing H. Now back to solid mode and texture paint mode, we will paint the upper mouth. It's time to paint the junction between the top and bottom of the mouth. To do that, we need to start by unhiding the entire mouth. Again, we need to disable the back face culling, as we want to paint the back of the faces. If there are any unpainted spots left behind, decrease the subdivision levels and repaint. Continue painting and correcting any problems that may appear. Adding some more details. Now we will unhide everything. Enter edit mode, and then press Alt-H to do it. Go back to texture paint mode. Now we have to paint the missing spots where the gums connect to the lips. Trying to recreate some cool details we can see in the images. Now there's something that we missed, and it is also important to paint the upper front gums. It may not seem important to paint the upper front gums because the lips will cover them. However, if we want to allow our wolf to have some emotions later, such as anger, we better paint the upper front gums. Because when a wolf gets angry, its nose wrinkles, causing its lips to lift, which will eventually reveal the gums underneath. We will simulate this when we rig the wolf, so we need to have good-looking gums for that. But to paint the gums, we need to hide the lips that are covering them. So enter edit mode once again. Select the mouth by pressing L while the mouse is over it. Invert the selection and then hide it. Now we want to select the faces of the lip that covers the upper gums. Select a face, hold Ctrl and select another face in the same loop. This will select all faces up to the last one selected. Keep selecting the faces. Hide them. Now back to texture paint mode, we can paint the gums. After painting the gums, enter edit mode and unhide everything. It's time to paint the claws. Select the reference image with the wolf's paws. If the brush is leaving unpainted spots, remember to decrease the subdivision levels and paint again. We painted the claws completely black. Now let's add some details, using a little gray. We will work on the paw pads. First, double-click on the paw pads image to expand it. Now let's choose a nice color. Time to paint the paw pads. Don't forget the dew claw and the carpal pad. The digital pads are not ready yet. To add more detail, we will use an alpha texture close to what we did while sculpting. For now, let's minimize BREF. In the Properties panel, go to the Texture tab. Create a new texture. There is a link in the description to download the texture we will be using, but feel free to use any other texture if you wish. In the image settings, press Open to browse your folders, and select the alpha texture you downloaded before. It is always a good practice to rename it because it will be easier to identify. We need to change some brush settings. So open the stroke settings and change the stroke method to anchored. We also need to make sure the texture mapping is set to view plane. If you remember correctly from the sculpting tutorial, the anchored stroke method creates a single dab at the brush location. Clicking and dragging will scale the dab diameter. In short, we will press and hold the pen or mouse in a specific position, and then drag to expand the area that will be affected by the texture. Now place the cursor over the digital pads. Press and hold the pen or mouse button and drag. Release it when it looks good enough. Repeat the process until all the digital pads are filled with the texture. We can use another color so the paw pads look more natural and dirty, instead of having only one color. Now we will work on the snout. Let's start by selecting a reference image with the wolf's head. Before we start painting, we need to change the stroke method back to space. We also need to delete the texture, as we won't need it anymore. The muzzle of wolves is generally darker in the parts near the nose and around the lips. This is basically what we want to recreate now. So let's change the color to black. Center the viewport on the area you need to paint. Start painting the muzzle to darken it around the nose and lips. Wolves, like many other terrier mammals, have whiskers. Usually, we can find some darker spots in the places where the whiskers are. We will paint these darker spots. We must keep in mind that the spots are irregular and do not have the same spacing between them. There seems to be some sort of faded horizontal lines connecting the spots, so let's simulate that very loosely. We will also recreate that brown stain. We need to darken the areas around the lips. Feel free to add some more details at any time. I added some more details to the paws and body. Feel free to do this as well if you want a more detailed texture. Now it's about time we paint the tongue. we want to select the reference image of the wolf with its mouth open, or any other image you might have that allows us to see the wolf's tongue. Secondly, we want to hide everything except the tongue. So let's go into Object Mode and unhide everything by pressing Alt-H. Now select the tongue, press Ctrl-I to invert the selection, and then H to hide it. Before we start painting, we need to create a material for the tongue, just like we did with the body. We will split the viewport into two different areas. This time, move the mouse cursor to the bottom right corner of the viewport. The cursor will change its appearance. Press and hold the left mouse button and drag the mouse up and slightly to the left. We want to change the bottom area. Currently it is set to 3D viewport, but we want to change it to shader editor. Now we're going to create a new material, but instead of creating it in the properties panel, we'll do it in the shader editor. Make sure the tongue is selected and the shader type is set to object. Create a new material and give it a name that is easy to identify. Like we did with the body, we need to create the diffuse map for the tongue. So press Shift-A, select Texture, and then Image Texture. Place the node where you want it and then press the left mouse button. Connect the color output of the Image Texture node to the base color input of the principled BSDF node. Let's create an image texture now. Press New on the Image Texture node. Name it something like Wolf Tongue Diffuse. The texture of the tongue does not need to be as large as that of the body, since the tongue is a much smaller object. Nonetheless, we will create a texture of 4096 by 4096 pixels. This way, we will still be able to get some nice details. As for the color, we can leave it black this time. Press New Image to create the texture. We can now close the shader editor area, maximizing the 3D viewport. If we go into Texture Paint mode, we will see that the tongue color in the 3D viewport is now black. Just as we did before, we will use the reference image to pick a color for the tongue. Paste the hex color code in Blender. Paint everything, or use the fill brush to completely fill the tongue with the color. We'll use a lighter color to paint some highlights in the texture. You may want to lower the subdivision levels in the multi-resolution modifier to speed up painting. Now we're going to use a darker color to paint some darker spots, like the median sulcus. Keep adding details to the tongue and feel free to try different colors. We might want to add some highlights and shadows to the bottom of the tongue as well. Don't forget that we need to save the texture, just like we did with the body, otherwise it will be lost the moment we close Blender. So open the UV editor. If you can't see the texture clearly, it's probably because of the subdivision levels in the multi-resolution modifier. The mesh is subdivided and therefore we are looking at the subdivided UVs. To take a better look at the texture, simply lower the subdivision levels in the multi-resolution modifier. But we didn't actually come here to see the texture, but to save it. So go to Image. Save As. Select the folder where you want to save the texture, and then rename it. Now the texture we will use for the tongue will also be used for the teeth and eyes. If you remember correctly from the unwrapping tutorial, we unwrapped the tongue, teeth, and eyes together. For this reason, you may want to name the texture accordingly. Change the format to JPEG, and also, even though I forgot to do this, make sure the quality is set to 100%. The tongue is lacking detail, so we will use another alpha texture. Same process as before, we will create a new texture. Feel free to rename it, as it is always good practice to do so. This time, we will change the color space to non-color. Once again, we will use the anchored stroke method. As for the texture mapping, leave it as view plane. Feel free to add another reference image to help you paint the details on the tongue. The image that I used is actually the tongue of a black German Shepherd, which works just fine. Double-click the reference image to expand it. One thing that we can do to improve the look of the texture is to play with the blending modes. Depending on the colors you're using, some blending modes may work better than others. In this specific case, I use soft light. But go ahead and try other blending modes to see how they behave. When you feel like you've found the perfect combination, start painting the tongue. The texture is a little exaggerated, so you may want to reduce the brush strength a little bit, or paint with less pressure. Even so, it will look a little different than what we see in the reference image, but that's okay. You can always take a look at the texture in the material preview. We're done with the alpha texture. Change the stroke method to space. I changed it to dots, but you can and should change it to space. We will paint the tip of the tongue with a more vivid color, so feel free to pick it from the reference image. Delete the texture and change the blending mode back to mix. Let's paint the tip of the tongue a little. Now we need a darker color to add more detail to the median sulcus and other parts of the tongue. We can simply swap the colors if your second slot has a darker color. Otherwise, just choose another color. We want to reproduce some fissures in the tongue, like the ones we can see in the reference image. It is a good idea to disable the mesh symmetry in the x-axis for a while, otherwise, every detail you add to the tongue will be symmetrical and look unnatural. It's looking good. I would say that's it for the tongue. Now it's time to paint the teeth. Go back to object mode. Unhide everything by pressing Alt-H. We will start with the bottom teeth, so select them, and then press Ctrl-I to invert the selection. Press H to hide everything except the bottom teeth. Now let's go to texture paint mode. Once again, we can see that the teeth are pink, and by now, you should know the reason why, because it has no material whatsoever. This time, instead of creating a new material, we're going to use the one we created for the tongue, because as I said before, the tongue, teeth and eyes will share the same textures. We can also rename the material to cover the tongue, teeth and eyes, although this time it's not important because each one will receive a different material in the next tutorial. Don't need to be confused, they will share the same textures but have different materials. Let's expand a reference image that allows us to see the teeth better. Pick a color from the image and paste it in Blender. Let's use the fill brush to completely fill the teeth with the selected color. We need a darker color to make the teeth look a little dirty, like a wolf's teeth should be. Before we start darkening and adding details to the teeth, we could actually enable the mesh symmetry in the x-axis once again. However, if the mesh is not 100% symmetrical, the mesh symmetry may not work properly, and unfortunately, that is what will likely happen here. Feel free to test it yourself and see if the mesh symmetry in the x-axis is working properly on the teeth. If so, you should use it. If not, that's fine, we will paint the left and right teeth simultaneously, at least for the most part. What we want to do is press 3 on the numpad to go to the right orthographic view. Disable the occlude option. This will allow us to paint not only the faces directly under the brush, but all the faces behind it. Start by painting the base of the teeth, which is the part that should get dirtiest. Now if we rotate the viewport, we will notice that some parts of the teeth are not painted. This happened because of the position of the faces while we were painting. So we need to fix this and paint what's missing. While at it, feel free to add some details to the teeth. To help us see what the teeth look like with the gums visible, we can unhide everything. Select the teeth and go back to texture paint. We can paint the teeth while the gums are visible. We're not done with the bottom teeth yet, but first let's repeat the whole process with the top teeth. In short, add the material to the upper teeth, fill the teeth with the lighter color, go to orthographic side view, disable occlude, and then paint the base of the teeth with the darker color. Fix paint issues and add more detail to the teeth. The teeth should be a little yellow, so let's pick a more yellowish color. Let's paint the middle of the teeth with this half yellow, half beige color. The tip of the teeth should be lighter, so we will use a lighter color, almost white. Make sure you swap colors, so you don't discard the last color used, as we will need it for the lower teeth. Paint the tips of the teeth. The exact same process for the lower teeth. Start by painting the middle of the teeth with that yellowish color, and then paint the tips of the teeth with a whiter color. That's basically it for the teeth. All that's missing are the eyes, so let's start with the iris. Let's go back to object mode, and then unhide everything. Now we want to hide everything except the iris. Even the iris, we only need one visible, as both irises are linked objects, and therefore painting one of them will also affect the other. Once again, we will add an image to be ref. This time we will add an image with the eyes of a wolf. Now let's zoom in on one of the wolf's eyes. Minimize or close the folder, and then go into texture paint mode. The iris is pink, as expected, because it doesn't have a material yet. So we want to select the same material used for the tongue and teeth. Now we want to start by picking a color from the eye on the reference image. Paste the color into Blender. The iris of wolves has a dark rim around it, so we will paint the iris, but leave that dark rim. We want to select the paint hard brush, and then increase the radius so that it doesn't paint the entire iris, but leaves a border around it. Make sure you're in the front orthographic view by pressing 1 on the numpad, or start rotating the viewport, and hold Alt until you align it to the front orthographic view. You may need to increase the size of the radius. Start painting the iris. Select the Paint Soft brush once again. Pick a lighter color. Start painting the center of the iris. We want the center of the iris to be lighter, and the edges to be darker. We want details in the iris, and for that we will use an alpha texture once again. I'm going to use this space alpha texture because I think it will work well on the iris, but feel free to use any other if you prefer. Back in Blender, we want to create another texture. Make sure the color space is set to non-color. Rename the texture. Make sure you change the stroke method to anchored. Again, feel free to play around with blending modes and different brush strengths. We can add the texture to the iris multiple times with different blending modes and brush strengths, until we get a nice result. Change the blending mode back to mix. Delete the texture in the tool panel as we won't need it anymore, and then change the stroke method back to space or dots. Whenever you need to smooth the texture, don't forget to hold Shift to do so. We will use a darker color to paint the outer part of the iris. While at it, feel free to add some details. Now let's paint the pupil. For this we need the color black. Change the brush size so that it is close to the size of a pupil in relation to this iris. Paint it exactly in the center of the iris, and you may want to increase the brush strength to the maximum. If we look at the image, we can see that the edge of the pupil is smooth, so we want to recreate that by smoothing it out in the texture. Now we can unhide the wolf's body to understand what the iris will look like with the eyelids covering part of it. So go to Object Mode, unhide everything and then hide the eye, that is, the cornea and sclera, so that it does not cover the iris. Back to Texture Paint mode, we can understand how the pupil behaves when partially covered by the eyelids. We will try to recreate what we see in the reference image. The iris seems to be darker where the eyelids are. Now that looks pretty good. Again, let's go back to Object Mode and then hide everything except the iris. Now we need to soften those darker parts, otherwise it will probably look weird when the wolf rotates its eyeballs a little bit. The rim around the iris we talked earlier, it's practically non-existent now, so we need to paint it. With a darker brown color, close to black, we want to paint the edge of the iris. Now let's darken the outer part of the iris a little more. That's pretty much it for the iris. We will now paint the sclera. We want to go back to Object Mode and unhide everything. This time, we want to hide everything except the entire eye. Press C and choose Wireframe mode so you can see and select the sclera/cornea object and the iris. Invert the selection and hide everything that is selected. Back in solid mode, select the sclera and go to Texture Paint mode. Again, the sclera is pink because it has no material, so select the same material used for the iris, tongue and teeth. We will add another reference image to be ref. This time, we'll use an illustration of an eye to help us. So drag the image to be ref and double-click to expand it. Now we want to start by choosing a pure white color, and then drag the slider down to darken it a little bit. Fill the eye with the selected color. The reason why we didn't hide the iris was so that we could see where the cornea ends and the sclera begins, because the cornea ends precisely where the iris is located. We want to use a darker color to paint the sclera around the iris. We will simulate the reddish part of the eye, as well as the veins. Pick the color of a vein from the reference image and paste it into Blender. Now we will start by gently painting the back of the eye with this color. To simulate the veins, we will use another alpha texture. The alpha texture has a black background, which we need to delete. To do this, we will need an image editing software. There are many image editing software that do this. I'll explain how to do this using Photoshop, which is the industry standard image editing software. But I will also explain how to do this using GIMP, a free and open source alternative to Photoshop. Starting with Photoshop. Open the image in Photoshop. On the right side of the screen is the Layers panel, where we can find a single layer with the alpha texture. Currently the layer is locked because it is a background layer, and for that reason we cannot remove the black background. To change this, all we need to do is click on the lock icon, or right-click on the layer and select Layer from Background, then click OK in the pop-up window. To delete the black background, we can use the Magic Wand tool. If you can't find the Magic Wand tool in the left panel, you may need to select Edit from the top menu, select Toolbar, and then drag the Magic Wand tool from the extra tools to the toolbar. In my case, the Magic Wand tool is already in the toolbar. With the Magic Wand tool selected, press anywhere on the black background and it will select everything with the same color. Press Delete on the keyboard and it's done. Now all we need to do is export the image. So go to File, Export, Export as. Change the format to PNG so that the image is saved without a background and then press Export. Save it on your folder. Now to do the same with GIMP. GIMP is a free alternative to Photoshop and it's pretty decent. Go to gimp.org to download it directly or via torrent. Now open the image in GIMP. Just like in Photoshop, we have the layers on the right side of the screen. We need to right-click on the layer and select the Add Alpha Channel option. Otherwise, we won't be able to save the image without a background. Now we will select the Fuzzy Select tool, which is pretty much the same as Photoshop's Magic Wand tool. With the Fuzzy Select tool, press anywhere on the black background and it will select everything with the same color. Press Delete. Now to export the image, go to File, Export as. You may need to change the format extension. We want to save the file in PNG, so change the extension accordingly and then export. Everything should be fine in the pop-up settings, so go ahead and export. That's pretty much it. Now back to Blender. We want to create a new texture with the image we just saved. Make sure the color space is set to non-color. For the blending mode, we want to select color. As for the stroke method, let's change it to anchored once again. Now just start adding veins to your heart's content. Try positioning and rotating them so they start at a central point and go outwards. Play with the strength of the brush so that some veins are more faded and others more vivid. At some point you may want to switch the stroke method back to space and try adding more veins. Remember that now you will not be adding one at a time, but many, so be careful not to overdo it. Feel free to delete the texture when you no longer need it. I ended up changing the blending mode to multiply and painted some more. That's basically it for the sclera. Don't forget to go to the UV editor and save the texture. Go back to object mode and unhide everything. We're almost done painting the texture, but before we call it a day, there are a few things that need to be fixed. Switch the viewport shading to material preview, either in the top right or by pressing Z. In the material preview, we can see all the textures simultaneously. Now if we take a look at the wolf's mouth, we can see that the tones of the tongue and the tones of the rest of the mouth are way too different, which is strange. Let's fix this using image editing software once again. Again, I'll start by explaining how to do this in Photoshop and then in GIMP. Open the wolf body texture in Photoshop. Make sure you open it with the right dimensions. Then drag the texture of the tongue, teeth, and eyes, also into Photoshop, and press Enter. We will have two layers, one below, with the texture of the wolf's body, and another, above, with the texture of the tongue, teeth, and eyes. In the layer above, we want to delete everything but the tongue. First, we have to rasterize the layer, because it is currently a smart object. I won't go into details, but in short, a smart object is a layer with vector or raster image data, which preserves the source content of the image with all its original characteristics, allowing us to perform non-destructive editing, such as scaling, rotating, transforming, or distorting, without losing data or quality. By rasterizing this layer, we will convert it to pixels, losing the ability to perform non-destructive edits, but gaining the ability to edit the pixels directly, which is what we want. To rasterize a layer, right-click it, and select Rasterize Layer. Now to delete everything but the tongue. First, let's get rid of the black background. Use the Magic Wand tool to select the black background, and then delete it. We need to select the tongue, and then invert the selection. We will use the pen tool to do it. The pen tool is very easy to use. Simply press and hold the left mouse button to create an anchor point, then drag the mouse to adjust the direction points, and therefore the curvature of the path. Keep adding anchor points around the tongue. Select the first anchor point created to close the path. Right-click anywhere in the scene, make selection. Now we have the tongue selected. To invert the selection, make sure you have the rectangular marquee tool selected. Right-click anywhere, select inverse. Delete everything except the tongue. We no longer need the selection, so click anywhere in the scene to deselect everything. We will use the Move tool to scale down the tongue and position it over the mouth. Left-click and drag the corners to scale. Left-click and drag inside the box to move. Now looking at the tongue and mouth, we can see that there is indeed a difference in the tones. The mouth is less saturated and lighter than the tongue. We will change that in no time. We want to select the mouth and change its color and saturation. First, we will use the Magic Wand tool to select the background. Now with the Marquee tool active, hold down the Alt key and start selecting everything except the mouth. Right-click. Select Inverse. This will select the mouth. Let's add a color balance adjustment layer. Adjustment layers allow us to adjust tones, colors, contrasts, among other things, without permanently modifying the pixels in an image. When we added the adjustment layer, a mask was automatically created with our selection. In short, a mask is basically used to hide a layer completely or partially. That is, if we have a mask on a layer, the black part of the mask will hide the layer, while the white part will show it. Now we can drag the sliders to change the tones, and this will only affect the mouth, because the mask is white where the mouth is, showing the effect, and black outside of it, hiding the effect. Let's play with the sliders to change the color of the mouth so that it matches the tongue a little better. We changed the color of the mouth, but we still need to change the color of the lips. That is a no-brainer. All we need to do is paint the mask white where the lips are. But before that, we will make sure we only paint the lips and nothing else. To do that, use the Magic Wand tool to select the background and then invert the selection. To paint on the mask, start by selecting it. Select the Brush tool and make sure the active color is white. Change the brush size in the top menu if needed. Again, make sure the mask is selected, feel free to zoom in if needed, and start painting the lips. The color balance did a good job and the mouth color looks much closer to the tongue color, but it's not quite there yet. So let's add another adjustment layer. This time, hue and saturation. We want to decrease the saturation, so drag the slider a little to the left. The problem is that we are desaturating the entire image. This is because the mask is not set to hide anything, as it is completely white. Fortunately, we have an easy fix for this. All we need to do is copy the mask of the color balance layer and use it here. To do this, just hold Alt and select the mask and we'll be able to see it in the scene. Use the rectangular marquee tool to select the entire scene, and then press Ctrl+C to copy. Select the new mask and press Ctrl+Shift+V to paste in place. That's it. So now both the color balance and the hue saturation adjustment layers have an identical mask. Play around with the sliders a bit more if you feel there are still some improvements that can be made. When you're done, don't forget to hide the tongue layer before saving the texture. Press the eye on the left side of the layer to hide it. Go to File. Export. Export as. Make sure to change the format to JPEG and set the quality to the highest possible. You may want to make a backup of the texture before replacing it. In fact, it's a good idea to have several different backups of your textures and 3D files. I will also teach a way of doing this, using GIMP, for those who want to use it instead of Photoshop. Open the wolf body texture in GIMP, make sure you open it with the right dimensions. Then drag the texture of the tongue, teeth, and eyes, also into GIMP. The first thing we need to do is add an alpha channel to the layer, otherwise it will always have a background even if we try to remove it. Select the black background of the image using the Fuzzy Select tool, and then delete it. Now, just like we did in Photoshop, we will use the Paths tool, which is very similar to the Pen tool in Photoshop. Just press and hold the left mouse button to create an anchor point, then drag the mouse to adjust the direction points, and therefore the curvature of the path. Keep adding anchor points around the tongue. To close the path, hold down Ctrl and left-click on the first anchor point created. Right-click anywhere in the scene, choose Select. From Path, this will select the tongue. We want to invert the selection, so right-click, select, invert. Delete everything that is selected. Use the rectangle select tool to deselect everything by clicking anywhere in the scene. Now we need to resize the tongue and place it over the mouth. To do this, go to the top menu, Tools, Transform Tools, Scale. A box will appear around the image. We can now drag the handles on the edges of the box to scale the image, and drag the middle handle to move the image. Place the image over the mouth and press Enter. We need to change the colors of the mouth to match the tongue. We'll start by duplicating the layer. To do this, right-click on the layer and select Duplicate Layer. Now we will change the colors on the duplicated layer. So go to the top menu, select Colors, Color Balance. Drag the sliders so that the color of the mouth starts to match the color of the tongue. You might also want to play with hue and saturation. As you may have noticed, we are not just changing the colors of the mouth, but of the entire image. What we want to do now is add a mask to the layer. Make sure you choose a black mask so that the layer is completely hidden. Now with the layer active, not the mask, use the fuzzy select tool to select the background. Invert the selection, and then select the mask. With the paintbrush tool and the white color active, let's start painting the mask. For the lips, you may want to reduce the brush size. We will use the rectangle select tool to deselect everything by clicking anywhere. Now we're going to export the image, but before that, don't forget to hide the tongue layer. To export the image, go to the top menu, File, Export As. Remember we want to save the image as JPEG. Finally, export it. Now that we have changed the texture in an image editing software, if we take a look at the result in Blender, we will see the difference. There is still one detail that I forgot before. We should paint the wolf's throat. In short, you may want to hide everything except the mouth, and then paint the throat hole using a dark color, perhaps even black. Unhide everything, and then switch back to Object Mode. In Object Mode, unhide everything that was hidden. The wolf texture is fully painted. We cannot see the iris of the eye, but that is because it is covered by the cornea, and the materials are not finished yet. So all the transparencies, reflections, and so on, are not there yet. However, if we hide the cornea and sclera, we will be able to see the iris. We can do this just to check that everything looks okay. Another thing we can do is to check how the texture will look under more realistic lighting. To do this, we will use the render preview. In short, rendering is the process of generating image or video output files from 3D scenes. Rendering simulates lights, materials, and other visual elements that produce a more realistic result. So even though we won't render anything right now, we can still preview a render with very simple lighting. So select Render Preview in the viewport shading. We will notice that the scene will become very dark. This is because it has no lights whatsoever, so we need to add them. Press Shift A and add a sunlight. We will be able to see the light over the wolf. In the Properties panel, Data tab, we can increase or decrease the intensity of the light. Let's increase it so we can see it better in the viewport. One thing we can notice is that there is another object in the viewport, which is the sunlight. We can select, grab, scale, and rotate the light just like we do with a mesh. Now the sunlight is completely vertical and illuminates the scene as if it were noon. The direction of the light depends on the rotation of the object itself. So let's select the sunlight, move it to the side of the wolf, and then rotate it a little bit. We will notice that the lighting in the scene has changed because we rotated the light. Feel free to change the angular diameter of the sun, as this will soften the shadows. Now we can take a look at the textures under a more realistic lighting. That's it for the texture painting tutorial. If you liked the video and learned something from it, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more tutorials. Leave a comment, tell me what you think. Thank you for watching.